According to legend, the body loses 21 grams at the moment of death. Most people think that is the soul leaving the body, but in my family's house, we learned a darker truth. This weight doesn't just disappear. It settles into the floorboards. It clings to the curtains. It waits in the shadows of the hallway like a hunter. My grandmother, Ma Evelyn, didn't leave us when her heart stopped. She just changed her shape. She became the cold draft that stops you mid-breath. She became the scratching sound behind the wallpaper. She became the thing that watches you from the reflection of a dark TV screen. We thought we were mourning her, but we were actually being hunted by her. And the worst part? She wasn't looking for a goodbye. She was looking for a way back in. I remember vividly the day my grandmother died. The house didn't feel empty. It felt full of something dark and heavy. She died in the guest bedroom, the one with the heavy oak door that always groaned on its hinges. I was holding her hand when her eyes rolled back. She didn't look peaceful. She looked terrified. Her fingers gripped my wrist with a strength no dying woman should have, her nails digging into my skin until I bled. She was staring at a corner of the ceiling, her jaw working as if she were trying to chew the air.
Don't let it in, my son. If I go, I am taking the warmth with me.
When her heart finally stopped, the temperature in the room plummeted. It wasn't just a chill, it felt like the heat was being sucked out of my very bones. I looked at her face, and for a split second, I saw her mouth drop open, much wider than humanly possible. A thin gray mist escaped her lips, swirling like a trapped animal before vanishing into the shadows of the wardrobe. The funeral was a blur of black veils and fake sympathy. But when we returned to the house, the glitches started. It began in the kitchen. My mother was making tea to calm her nerves when every single cabinet door slammed shut at the exact same time. The sound was like a volley of gunshots. She screamed and ran into the living room, but when I went in to check, the kitchen was silent. Only, all the knives were gone from the wooden block. We searched for an hour, our hearts pounding. We found them in the guest bedroom, the death room. They had been stabbed deep into the mattress where Grandma had died, arranged in a perfect, jagged circle. In the center of the circle sat her dentures, clicking open and shut as if they were still trying to speak. That night, the scratching began. It was coming from inside my closet. I walked over, my legs shaking, and yanked the door open. My clothes weren't just moved. Every single shirt and pair of pants had been tied into tight, angry knots. Hanging from the center bar was Grandma's old Sunday dress. It was swaying back and forth, even though the windows were locked and the air was dead still. By the third night, the house felt like it was breathing. The walls seemed to pulse with a low, wet thud, like a giant heart buried in the insulation. I woke up at 3:13 a.m. because I couldn't move. The room was pitch black and smelled like rotting meat and old perfume. I tried to scream, but it felt like a cold hand was pressed over my mouth. I looked toward the foot of my bed. A figure was crawling up the blankets. It moved like an insect, its limbs cracking and snapping with every movement. It was Grandma, but her skin was the color of a bruise, and her eyes were gone, just deep, black holes leaking a dark, oily fluid. She crawled over my legs, her hands feeling like blocks of ice. She leaned over my face, her jaw unhinging until it touched her chest. She didn't speak. She just exhaled a wet, freezing wind into my mouth. In that breath, I saw her memories. I saw her sitting in this very house for 40 years, hating us for our youth, hating us for the time she had lost. She wasn't sad she was dead, she was jealous that we were still alive and warm. We tried to flee the next morning, but the house wouldn't let us. As we reached for the front door, the locks turned by themselves, the metal screeching. The house began to groan, a deep, metallic sound that shook the floor. Then, we heard a rhythmic thumping coming from behind the floral wallpaper in the hallway. I grabbed a hammer from the utility closet and ripped the paper away. Behind the wood, tucked into a hollow space in the wall, we found a rusted tin box. Inside were dozens of family photos. But they had been altered. In every single picture, our faces had been meticulously scratched out with a needle. In their place, she had drawn tiny, weeping eyes with red ink. Below the photos was a lock of my hair, a button from my mom's coat, and a tooth that Aunt Martha had lost years ago. She had been collecting us. She had been preparing to stay. The thumping got louder, moving from the walls to the ceiling, right above our heads. The walls began to weep that same dark, oily liquid, staining the carpet. Then, her voice erupted from the vents, a distorted, screeching version of the woman who used to bake us cookies.
Stay with me, I am lonely in the dark.
The air became so thick with the smell of decay that my mom fainted. The lights exploded, raining glass down on us. In the strobe light flicker of the dying sparks, I saw her. Grandma was standing in the middle of the stairs, but she was 10 feet tall now, her neck twisted at an impossible angle, her long, gray fingers reaching for us. "You're not my grandmother," I yelled, throwing the hammer at the figure. It passed right through her and smashed into the grandfather clock, which began to chime backwards. The figure shrieked, a sound that shattered every mirror in the hallway. We used the moment of her scream to run for the living room window. I grabbed a chair and smashed the glass. I pushed my mother out first, then Martha. As I scrambled out, a cold wet hand grabbed my ankle. I looked back and saw her head poking out from under the sofa, her empty eye sockets fixed on me. "Just a piece of you, Jake," she whispered. "Give me just a piece to keep." I kicked with all my might, my shoe slipping off in her grasp. I tumbled out onto the grass, gasping for air that didn't taste like death. We moved into a hotel, thinking we were safe. But the wait didn't stay at the old house. 3 days later, my mother started complaining about the cold. She began to wear Grandma's old scarf, the one we thought we left behind. When I asked her where she got it, she just stared at me with glazed eyes and said, "It was in my suitcase, Jake. I've always had it." Then came the humming. I heard it through the bathroom door while my mother was showering. It was the same distorted lullaby. When she came out, she was brushing her hair, pulling the brush so hard that clumps of hair were falling out. She didn't seem to notice. "Grandma used to love this song," she whispered, her voice sounding a little too deep, a little too dry. I went to my mother's room while she was asleep. I checked her suitcase. Underneath her clothes, I found the rusted tin box from the walls of the old house. I hadn't brought it. Martha hadn't brought it. The house had delivered it. I knew then that the spirit wasn't tied to the house. It was tied to the blood. I took the box to the woods behind the hotel and tried to burn it. But the matches wouldn't light. Every time I struck one, a cold wind blew it out, even though the trees around me weren't moving. I looked up and saw a shadow standing between the pines. It wasn't 10 feet tall anymore. It was the exact size of my mother. I ran back to the room, but the door was locked. From inside, I heard the sound of glass breaking. I kicked the door down and found my mother standing on the balcony, leaning dangerously far over the railing. "She wants to come back, Jake," my mother said, her voice now a perfect match for Grandma's. "She says it's too cold out there. She says your skin looks so warm." My mother turned around. Her eyes were gone. In their place were the black, oily holes I had seen in my bedroom. She reached out a hand, and I saw that her fingernails had grown long and yellow, just like the ones that had dug into my wrist on the night Grandma died. We didn't look back. We drove until the sun came up, leaving my mother at a hospital where they said she was having a nervous breakdown. The police went to the old house one last time. They found my shoe in the middle of the living room, shredded into tiny pieces. They found the knives in the bed. But they said the house was empty. They told us we must have had a group hallucination caused by grief and a gas leak. But I know better. We sold the house for a fraction of its worth to a developer who wanted to tear it down. The day the bulldozers arrived, the lead driver quit. He claimed that when he hit the front porch, he heard an old woman scream from inside the engine, and the oil that leaked out of the machine was dark, thick, and smelled like lavender. I live in a modern apartment now. No wood, no wallpaper, no history. But last night, I went to brush my teeth. I looked in the mirror and for a split second, I didn't see my own reflection. I saw a pair of empty, black holes where my eyes should be. And when I opened my mouth to scream, a thin, gray mist drifted out. I looked down at the sink. There, sitting on the white porcelain, was a single, yellowed tooth. It wasn't mine. It was hers. Grandma was never truly gone. Even after her body was buried and the house left behind, her spirit lingered, heavy and patient, following us from room to room, from place to place. No matter how far we ran, the air always felt colder behind us, as if something unseen was walking just a step out of sight, waiting for us to stop. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more stories sealed in the dark. Whatever you heard, don't open it. New stories are always waiting inside the vault. Until next time, keep it locked. Please like and drop your comments.